on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
I clean closets, I weed, I organize filing cabinets. I punish myself for not writing, but it pushes me back to the writing faster. And it gets clean closets.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers, no more barriers, no one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome. It is the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson.
We've got that weird thing again where you've just been to Tenerife in this world, but not in the real world. You haven't actually been there yet. How was it?
Not as we're recording this. I think it was probably okay. I'm hoping I got back without catching anything, and probably just had my PCR test arriving back in the country.
That's a pain. The whole thing is a colossal pain, isn't it? And
it is a pain.
On that note, we should say that we have more or less pulled the plug on the idea of being in Florida for September. It's just probably almost certainly not going to happen. We've told the organisers we almost certainly won't be there, and to disregard us in terms of presentations, unfortunately, which is such a shame. But the situation is not great there. America won't let us in anyway, so it's all kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, regardless of the fact that Florida is a hellhole at the moment, we can't even get in the country because President Biden doesn't like
us.
People like us.
It's not. To be fair, it's not just you and me, is it? I think it's not like a watch list.
Anybody else basically. So yeah, so we can't. It is a shame we can't get. We will see how we go. I mean, if next week they say, look, it's that you can come, then we might think about it. You and me, perhaps. I don't think John will go because. He's not a vulnerable person, but more vulnerable than either of us are. So we're probably not going to be there this year, which is a shame. But kind of keeping our fingers crossed now for November, because obviously we're down to come to 20 books in Vegas.
Yeah.
And we'll just have to see. I mean, John did he found something out the other day suggesting that, just speculation, of course, that foreign visitors wouldn't be allowed in the States until the 25th of November. Which, if that happens, we can't go to Vegas either. So.
No.
We'll just have to see. There's nothing we can do about it. Just going to play it by ear.
I'm really disappointed about it, and so I'm particularly sad in the first instance for NINC, for the organisers, and we've been in touch with Tordra and Mel this week to let them know. We're very supportive of NINC. We love it. It's our favourite little conference to go to. A very important, prestigious conference. It's just in a lovely part of the world, lovely group of people. Got friends there. I'll have friends for life who I've met at NINC. And we want to support them. We will do everything we can to make sure we're there in the future. We are still sponsors, and we've put some money into the conference this year, which we're very happy to do. But we probably won't be there in person. Let's fingers crossed for Vegas. If we don't go to Vegas, you and I have to have a few days off just playing golf somewhere warm. Let's go to Mallorca or something.
Yeah, I'll go for that.
Because we need to... I need to recharge some batteries and some sun. We've had a really rubbish August as well, just to make it even more miserable.
Yeah, not bad today, but yeah, it has been crap. So it will be. I'm looking at although I hope, of course, as this goes out, I'll be back. But not that I'm rubbing in. The forecast for Tenerife is like 28, 29 for the whole week. So.
I'm jealous. I'm not jealous of you sweating about getting home afterwards.
No,
but
well, that's the thing. If we get that, if we come up positive, I think we have to stay in a Spanish hotel, and it won't be the one we're going to. So yeah, I'm slightly nervous about that. But yeah, exactly.
An abyss.
Well, of course, I'll have my laptop, so I'll have a very productive 10 days probably.
Yes,
I'll probably write a couple of books and
in a small room with 2 children.
Well, they can have their own rooms, but it's
okay. Now this week's interview is Patricia McLinn. Is somebody who's straddled both trad and indie over the years. She's produced dozens of books, I'm going to say 70 odd books. Real feel for how the trad industry worked and how indie works now. Lots of tips about how to be successful in both worlds, particularly in indie now. And in particular, she's a discovery writer. We call them pantsers, but discovery writers is a much nicer expression. And you don't have to plot. You don't have to do things by strict structure if you want to write in the way that she does. So let's hear from Patricia, and then Mark and I will be back for a quick chat.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Patricia McLinn, welcome to the Self-Publishing Show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Now, that's a nice bit of artwork behind you. If people are watching on YouTube, is that your own work?
That is actually an original oil painting that my niece did that became the background for a cover of a book in my Wyoming Wildflowers romance series. She did, I think, 5 that,
Wow.
that because the original books were a watercolor that I had somebody do way back. And then I had my niece do this, and now she's too busy. So
Yeah.
I've got to figure out what to do with the upcoming books.
Well, that's very impressive. So
Yeah.
well done to your niece. For those people who aren't watching on YouTube, it's a lovely landscape, an oil landscape.
A Wyoming landscape.
Wyoming, there you go. Okay, right, let's get going. Patricia, we've got a lot to talk about. I think hopefully some encouragement for writers, particularly those who don't diligently plot or enjoy diligently plotting, to put it that way, and how to write, how to be a writer, the kind of mindset, I think, is what we're going to talk about. But let's start a bit with you and your background. I think it began in sports journalism. Is that right?
I did. Really practical, right?
Yeah. Well, there weren't many men in sports journalism, probably back in the day. Oh, sorry. It sounds very rude saying that. I'm sure you're only 22, 23.
No,
but...
you're absolutely right. There weren't. And I had an incident with a high school basketball coach from the Catholic high school who said, well, the state says you can come in the locker room now. And he was really grumpy about it. And I said, well, Coach, the state says I can, but my mother says I can't. And he was so delighted by that, he would bring his players out to me first.
Oh.
And so I would get them all first and get my story in first.
That's funny. Do you know that locker room thing is, I think it's quite an American, because I was a sports journalist. I started as well, like doing that. And I covered all the usual sports, but I covered ice hockey, which is not huge in the UK. We've got a few clubs, but we had a local club up in Peterborough. And it was populated by people who used to play NHL. I can remember Cam Plant, I think, was the captain. He used to play for Toronto Maple Leaf. But it was a very American environment, which I wasn't used to. And I remember Cam saying to me once, he said, okay, you can come in the changing room afterwards. And I genuinely didn't know what he was talking about. I don't know why did he want me to go in the changing room? Was I supposed to be getting changed?
Yeah, this is not a huge treat for those not in the know.
No, but I understand now. It was a kind of sports journalist thing. It's more a thing in America than it is in the UK, that you have access to the team before and after, and you can do interviews and stuff.
Well, usually only after.
Yes, usually only after. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know they were all battered and bruised and bleeding afterwards, but then as I
stinky.
And stinky, yes, indeed. Anyway, good. Okay, look. You got going in that. I know you had a great journalistic career. Just looking at scanning your CV, I think you ended up at the Washington Post, did you not?
Yes, I was there for 23 years.
Wow. And that's obviously one of the big newspapers on the planet. So that's a really good thing to do. But did you always want to be writing fiction? Was that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I always did.
And how did you transition? Well, how did you teach yourself then?
Well, when I first started trying to really write, I wrote some in college, and I took some courses, and then the professor scared the bejeebers out of me by saying, you could have a career in literary, and I thought, and I didn't particularly want literary because those books depressed me, and if they depressed me reading them for a day or two, how much were they going to depress me writing them for months to a year? I thought, this is not a good program. And then I started belatedly reading Regency romances, Georgette Hare, depending on who you talk to. And so I started trying to write those, and I sent them off to the beginnings to my sister-in-law, who had actually babysat for me when I was 6 years old, because I'm at the end of the family by a big chunk. And I would send them off to her, and she'd say, well, this is really good. What happens next? I said, I don't know. I have no idea. Because I always thought you had to start at the beginning and write to the end. So I had these various starts, and she finally said, don't send me anything else that's not finished, because I can't take being interested in these characters and getting no reward. So when I got to the Post, it was actually a more sane working schedule than I'd had at the other two papers, where it tended to work longer hours. And I I had more time. I was chipping wallpaper in my old house because there were multiple layers of wallpaper, and your mind starts to wander. Maybe there's something wonderful about old wallpaper paste, but I started having a story idea. So I would write it until I didn't know anymore, and then I'd go back and I'd chip wallpaper paste. And there's nothing to make you like writing better than chipping wallpaper. So I'd go back and forth.
That's a good tactic. Find something you really hate doing, and then if you're not doing it, you can write.
James, I still do that.
Wow.
When I am not writing, I don't go off and play. I clean closets, I weed, I organize filing cabinets. I punish myself for not writing, but it pushes me back to the writing faster, and it gets clean closets. So
there you go.
It's a win-win. So I started writing these things, and then I made every mistake. I sent off my favorite chapters to agents, and a few wrote back, and one of them in particular wrote back. It started off, "It's clear you know nothing about publishing." And then she went on and she said, "But you did this well, you did this well, you did this badly. And, she actually said I overplotted for my characters." So I started looking into that more. And then somebody along the line said, "Look at romance." Maybe she did, because you have to have the characters in order to have a story in romance. You can't get by with just a plot. You have to have characters that the readers are with. So I started reading romances. In about 6 weeks, I covered about 20 years of romance history in roughly chronological order. And at the beginning, I'm thinking, this is not for me. And by the end, I was like, okay, this I can do. And this made sense to me. I'd read War and Peace, and I can remember specifically, like, yeah, another battle. Who cares? Get back to the people. I wanted to know those relationships. And from there, I found the Washington romance writers while I was still working, of course, full time at the Post, and had through them, I started another book, was in a critique group, and had 8 minutes to pitch my story to an editor. Yeah, when she came down from New York, worst 8 minutes of my life. But she said, send her the full. And I did, and they bought it.
Wow!
Pretty quickly.
Well, that's good. I tell you what, I want to ask.
Plenty of rejections later.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I want to ask you one thing though. You were a journalist at the Washington Post, and somebody talked to you about writing literary fiction, because I think there's a bit of a snobbishness here, isn't there? And I seem to remember my colleagues in the newsroom who all had a novel in them, of course, all going to write a novel. And to be fair, one or two of them did. And they all saw themselves as literary fiction writers. But actually, it's refreshing to know right from the beginning, you thought, that's going to be boring. I don't want to do that. And you found genre fiction, which is the fiction that people love reading and consume in big numbers. And just a shout out to genre fiction, which drives indie publishing anyway, but is fun and enjoyable and nothing to be snobbish about.
Yeah, I was also very interested in mystery from the beginning, because I had read, I didn't read mystery until I got out of college, but then, fell into it like a vat of chocolate. It was amazing to read all those, the sort of classic, cozy mystery writers. And I just loved it.
Yeah.
And then, as I said, I discovered that I had probably been a secret romance reader in picking the romance parts out of classic literature and wanting to scoot by the other stuff.
You're the opposite as me, because I watched Top Gun and I couldn't wait for the romance to get over so we get back to the flying. But I understand what you're saying. To be fair, War and Peace is a romantic book, and I think the romance is what sustains it. Certainly the characters is what sustains it.
Uh-huh.
Great. So you got picked up. Well done, you, in a very competitive environment. Obviously, strong writer. So remind me the publishing company that picked you up.
Harlequin.
Harlequin.
It was Silhouette at that time, but
all subsumed. And how long did that trad period last then? And how many books did it last for?
I wrote 27 books in 24 years in trad. Is 24 or 25.
Wow. So more than a book a year, just over a book a year.
Could have written more.
And that process, normally in traditional publishing, they have their own timetable, which you obviously fit into. And it's quite a time slots here. And it can do two things. But it can get you to deadlines, which is one thing. But the other... Oh, somebody's woofing.
Sorry about that. My senior dog is making herself known.
That's okay. We like dogs. So it gets you right into title. But the other thing it does, and I had a friend go through this recently, is it kind of slowed the whole process down. I mean, I knew indie writers, not me, but I knew other indie writers who produced 5 books in the time that she wrote her first book through the trad system of going backwards and forwards with editors. Did you find that frustrating?
Absolutely. Because I could never get, but after a few years, I went part-time at the Post because for those years while I was initially published till I went part-time, I was basically working close to 2 full-time jobs. And I would call coworkers by character names, and I'd get in the car, and no matter where I meant to go, I'd end up at the Post. It was, so I went part-time to do wonderful exotic things like laundry and sleep. Sleep was a nice one. And but I could never get enough books published fast enough to get the momentum to stop the part-time job. I couldn't support myself on the writing income. And when you talk about the production, so that was, I was trad, then I was hybrid, then I was indie. So there's an overlap in these years. But I first started indie, first put books up in 2010.
So how did that work? Because you were obviously under contract for, I guess, for one series. Did you just come up with another series and decide you weren't going to tell the publisher about it, or?
Nope. They had an editor at Harlequin had told me that my books didn't sell well enough to republish.
Okay.
So this was way before indie, and that was a blow. That was definitely a blow. But I am stubborn enough that I thought they're not going to do anything with them. Give them back to me. There was nothing to do with them at that time. Absolutely nothing. But having them in my control was important to me. So I'd gotten the rights back to a lot of my early books. So I started with those books. That was the core of my beginning indie, and started 10 years of 6 figures, 11 years now.
Gosh, that doesn't happen very often, I don't think, that traditional publishing relinquish rights back.
Not anymore.
Right. Now, because now the electronic publishing industry makes it easier for them to comb the back catalogue, I guess.
I can remember having the publisher of Nink at Nink, I think the publisher of Harlequin at Nink, I think it was 2013. And you could tell as she left a panel, it was like she was running out to call Harlequin and tell them to stop giving back rights.
Right, yeah.
People were doing really well, and it became much more difficult after that. But in the years since I've gone indie, so now I'm over 60 books published. So yeah, I have done maybe twice plus as many books per year as Harlequin was having me do.
So back in 2010, around then, when you got your rights back and you indie published your previously published books, so presumably you had to go and get new covers, write the blurb, and do all of that. Yes. Okay, yes. and then did you market those books? How did you market them?
Well, initially I did everything. I did the formatting. I did every bit of it, and there were a group of us on forums and stuff, and we would sort of stumble along and lead each other through. And before that, I had started a website for several authors. There were about 10 of us to sell direct. Now that was very forward thinking and way before the time, and we weren't really marketing, and we couldn't get very much readership there, but it was a great idea. And I still have the URL in case the retailers go nuts. What was your question?
Oh, yeah. I was asking about the marketing more than anything else. So how you marketed it? Did you market?
Did not initially market. Didn't really learn much. I think it was 2013 that people were starting, maybe it was 2012, were starting to put book first in series free. And I was reluctant because, giving away your work. And I just recently looked at a graph of my sales from overall sales from 2010 to now. And you can see, bloop, it was astounding. It was just astounding. And that sort of made me go, okay, yeah, maybe I should be doing some marketing and I should be thinking about these things.
Okay. So what were your first forays into marketing?
Well, I consider putting a book free as marketing.
Oh, yes.
In fact,
yes.
it's my favorite. Yeah. It's my favorite because it's kind of no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
And you try to see if you're a good reader-writer match with somebody. And there are a few cranky people out there who will give you a bad review, even though they got it for free.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it's a great way to introduce yourself. And it's a comfortable way to me to introduce myself to readers. I'm not as comfortable going, oh, this is the best book ever. You've got to read it. Even if in my heart of hearts, I think that it just doesn't come naturally.
No.
So that's the primary one. Another one was, of course, the newsletter. And I initially was only doing newsletters when I had releases, I started a newsletter list with physical mail. So we're talking way back there. So of course I only did them when I had releases. And then somebody said, and then I started doing it. No, I was still doing it I was still doing it releases. And somebody said, you have to do it monthly. And I said, no, I don't. And they said, try it for 4 months. And darned if they weren't right. The numbers went up, the open, the click rate, everything went up. I thought, well, rats. And then I went for a period was in a special promotion with some other people. So I was doing 2 a month. And after the promotion was ending, I surveyed my readers and said, would you like to go back to once a month? And they overwhelmingly said, keep it at 2. Well, darn. And I just surveyed them again, hoping they might say pull back, because you hear a lot about the readers being tired, of stuff in their email. And again, they said, no, keep it at 2, maybe some more.
Well, that's good to have a loyal audience. How big is your mailing list now?
I hesitate so long because the gross number is 19,000.
Okay.
The active is between 13 and 14,000.
Yeah. Okay. And so you said 60 books. That's 60 books total. Or have you done 60 indie books?
No, 60 books total.
60 books. Okay. So you've done sort of 30 something.
Yeah.
32, 33. Okay. And the indie books, in terms of genre, with Harlequin, you were fairly mainstream romance, were you, or historical romance? And what have you done with your indie books?
I did do some historical romance too. I've done some indie and did one traditional. I had a mystery series, and the first 2 books were published traditionally by a smaller press. And then they offered a contract on the 3rd book. By that time, I was in the indie world and I felt I could do better. So I declined that contract. And then it took me a couple of years to get them to sell me back the rights to books 1 and 2. So that started like Caught Dead in Wyoming mystery series. And that is, that's my best selling series. And And I started a second series, and then I have a trilogy to be, which means it's got 2 books out so far. The third one is still to come, but it's a trilogy. It's going to be a trilogy. So those are, and they're a little different. Caught Dead in Wyoming is probably kind of in the middle. The Secret Sleuth series is a little more cozy, and the Innocence trilogy is edgy is too strong a word, but it's a little more than Caught Dead.
Ironically, being called Innocence. Anyway, let's talk about writing then. Let's talk about writing process. So you sort of said in the notes before the interview, you're not really a plotter. You're somebody, you sit down a bit like Marie Force, I think, does this. You sit down and the story comes out of you.
Saying I'm not a plotter is a very British understatement, James.
Right.
I am whatever you want to call it, discovery or pantser.
Discovery is a nicer expression, I think.
That's Joanna Penn uses discovery.
Yeah.
And I am the extreme. I write out of sequence. I usually I hear voices talking in my head. It's usually some sort of conflict. I don't know their names. It's like eavesdropping in a restaurant on a really interesting conversation, and you don't know who these people are yet, but you can pick up a lot of the emotion, and you can imagine, you can guess how they got there, or some of the things that got them there, and then you speculate on where they go from there. And this is the way I write the mysteries too. There's usually a scene, something. I hear voices. It's voices in my head. These people talking, and then it's like a bird building a nest. There are pieces I've heard, pieces I see while I'm thinking about the book. Something I had stored away in the back of my head 10 years ago. Oh, that can fit in here. And you just start putting it together.
So that when you hear the voice, the restaurant type conversation you're eavesdropping, that could be in the middle of the book.
Where that ends up, yes. In fact, it's often in the middle of the book.
Right. You start there.
Because it's some sort of real
moment,
conflict, that or emotion. Yeah. And
then you do your building. At what point do you then say, I need to start this book? I need to have a start, or do you just carry on writing what comes to you for a bit?
I carry on writing what comes to me, as long as it will keep coming to me.
Okay.
And then I have this mass, and I've done it long enough that I will have a general idea of what order some things go into. So that's in one file. In another file, I just have scenes, and I've sort of labeled them, or I have even bits and pieces. And I'm just storing them. I know they're going to go in the book somewhere, but I don't know where yet. And when the stuff stops coming to me, then I really have to work.
Right.
And the hope is that there's enough in that mass to make me feel horrendously guilty if I don't finish it. That I've got to give those characters their full life and the full story. So that usually carries me through the tougher part.
A sense of duty to your characters.
Yes. And then a sense of duty to the readers to go back through it multiple times to make sure you've picked up all the threads, because this is a way of writing where you can really drop things, and you have to be careful to do that.
So I was going to ask about that process. So at some point you have to start at the beginning again and edit your work effectively do a developmental edit, I guess, at that stage, to make sure that the stories work.
Absolutely. And I often recommend the book Making a Good Script Great by Linda Seeger, Seger, because it was the book that clicked for me on structure. But what I love about it is its premise is that you've already got something. You aren't starting from scratch, with word one, and you have to do it in this format. You've got something, and now how do you make sure that it has the right shape?
Right.
And I will, especially if I'm feeling like something is off, I will go to that and double check where I am.
And so after you've done that, a pass on the manuscript, what state is it in? Is there another polish to do after that, or is it then off to a copy editor?
It depends on the book. Because sometimes it will take 2 passes. One kind of big picture, clunky things. I'm still moving pieces around, looking at pace, looking at the structure, and then another pass for smoothing out. And then I usually do the copy editing.
Oh, okay.
And then I have a proofer. I have 2, sometimes 3 proofers.
Okay.
And one of those proofers was also an editor at the Washington Post, who's now my assistant. So, yeah.
Very good. Yeah, I think proofing is something you can't do yourself because you can't see.
No,
you can't see your own.
You can't. Although there are some tricks. Read it if you read from the bottom up on a page, because it disconnects you from them your words.
And you can read it out loud. Read it out loud, or have it read out loud by your computer. Is another one, isn't it? But it's still, nonetheless, I think, and from my own bitter experience, employing a proof editor is a good thing to do.
Oh, it's always a good thing to do. But another trick, another writer, Laura Altham, told me was she reads hers out loud in a really bad British accent. And the idea again is it disconnects you from it being your words.
I'd like to hear that. She's at Nink's Alaska. So it can be done. You know, there are lots of books on structure, and I'm somebody who thought I would probably be a discovery writer, but actually I really enjoy writing. I don't plot in a kind of spreadsheet fashion, but I write a long-winded synopsis, and I use that to then write my book. That's how I like working. But there are people who just don't like that structure stuff. They don't like writing stuff before it's happened. It kind of spoils it for them. And they want to be discovery writers. And I think you're living proof, as is Marie Force, that this is a viable way of doing things, as long as you've got a process that takes account of the way the original manuscript is going to be written, which is, to be honest, it's not going to be a fully formed manuscript.
And and you've got to get yourself over. You've got to push yourself from where it's fun and stuff is coming, and you're just writing whatever you know, because you have to have the structure at some point. So you've got to find something that's going to make you do that structure, even if you hate it. And I use guilt because you use the skills you're good at, right?
Guilt works for you. So how many words roughly would you have when it's at the point at which the voices stop talking to you and the stuff stops coming and you have to start working?
You know, it's varied with book to book. And I would say it's from 25,000 to 45,000 words. Oh, yeah. And maybe 50 once in a while.
What typical length are your books?
The romances are usually about 65 to 75, and it depends on the mysteries. The Caught Dead and Innocence are about 90 to 100K, and the Secret Sleuth is more like 65 to 70. Okay.
Tell me a little bit about your actual process.
That's the length of my novellas too.
Oh, yes. Well, a lot of romance genre books can be quite short compared to thrillers, which I write, which do tend to be a bit longer. I mean, neither of us write epic fantasy, which can be sagas, which can be even longer. But anyway, I want to ask a bit about your actual process. When and how do you write?
I don't have a schedule. I write right here at my desk. I write on the laptop a lot. It's however the day is working. I don't necessarily write every day. I write a lot of the days. And as I get to deadline, I write all the time. I'm more of a binge writer.
You give yourself your own deadlines?
Well, to me, pre-order is a deadline.
Oh, yeah.
If my own deadlines, I will blow off. But pre-order, I won't. I missed one in May by a week, and it's really bothering me. Really, really, really bothering me. And I know why. It was an accumulation of things, but so that comes from journalism. And I don't know if I needed deadlines, and that's why I went into journalism, or if I learned it from journalism. But that's just sort of gut grinding gnaw if you've missed a deadline.
Yeah. But I also think journalists, and I include myself here, are lazy, and nobody in our newsroom would have done anything if they didn't need to. So that's how the deadlines work. You needed to do stuff. We had a program that went out at 6:30 every night, and if you didn't have your piece in by 5, it wasn't on air. If you look, and if you missed it, your whole day's work, the whole day of the producer, and the lives of the people involved in the story were all for nothing because you didn't make it. So that was a big no-no.
It's guilt, James.
Guilt.
It's guilt.
Yes.
It works.
I used to worry about it. And do you write in Scrivener or Word or something else?
I write in Word. I tried Scrivener, and everybody said, "Oh, this should work great for you." But I think because I don't write in sequence, and I need to see the whole thing more, and I need to be able to juggle things around. And I tried 3 books. I think I tried, and each one I ended up taking back to Word.
Isn't that funny? Because everything you described then would lead somebody to using Scrivener.
Yeah.
But anyway,
it didn't work for
whatever
me.
Works for you. And
that's it.
Yes. And how's it going? I mean, in terms of sales and income, are you where you were when you don't have to do specific figures, but in terms of had you stayed at the Washington Post? I mean, how have things panned out for you?
Oh, great. I left the Post knowing that I had saved enough money to bridge to retirement, but it was going to be tight. But I needed to do that for family reasons and with the idea of being able to write full time. And I was extremely fortunate that this happened. I left in 2007, and indie books came not that long after. And it's been terrific. And as I said, this is something I really want to say to the new writers. Be careful, be careful, be careful. There's lots of talk about 6 figures. Gross.
Yeah.
And I will say I have been 6 figures. This is the 11th year. Gross. But my net has bounced all over the place depending on what's going on. Last year, it wasn't as good because I was flowing through a lot of money to my gig people to help them moving projects into 2020 to help them because other things had disappeared for them.
So, I think that the net and gross is a very important thing because people can say, I've got a 6-figure income, but if you're spending 80% on ads, that's not really the point. Do you have a kind of percentage spend of ads to income that you are happy with? And
no, I watch my income monthly, and I adjust the ads according to that, so that because it all goes on the credit card, so that I know if I'm going to have lower income, I want a lower credit card bill, and I'm tracking that. And that's another thing I'd really say to the starting writers, to track your individual money, because there's lots of information in there, and lots of people are on the forums and stuff going, "Oh, my sales dropped this month. Is everybody else seeing that?" You are going to have that. You're going to have your own rhythm of when things are better and when they're not. And the only way you're going to know that is by starting to track at the beginning.
Yeah.
For me, September tends to be a really bad month. Don't know why. It can be low for a lot of people, but it is consistently the worst month of the year for me. And now I've got 11 years I can look back on, and I can really see that trend. But the only way you can do that is start accumulating the data now.
Yeah.
And your data doesn't matter what other people are doing. For other people, September's fabulous. So
yeah, I'm a big fan of tracking, and I think it governs all our spending decisions, that sort of benchmarking. which is the best way of knowing whether what you're doing is effective or not. So what are you doing? What ads are you running at the moment?
Not many. I have a few very low cost Amazon ads. I have a few low cost Facebook ads, which I am not touching because Facebook is doing all those changes and stuff. I figure the less I fiddle with them, the less likely I will draw their attention. So I'm just letting those things perk along. And then I'll do BookBub feature deals. I try not to do those too frequently, and I try to leave a year plus between the same book being featured, and then I do BookBub ads.
Oh, you do BookBub ads?
Yes.
How do you find them?
I find them very useful, especially for non-US UK markets. I like them for that.
Good. So we can be discovery writers.
Yes.
We can migrate from trad to indie. And I'm assuming, I didn't ask you this question, but I'm assuming your income under trad, I mean, you were still working at the Washington Post then, which is an indicator that it was never going to get you into retirement.
No.
But indie writing has given you a career.
Yes. And, really padded retirement, paid off the house, has done a lot of nice things. Absolutely.
Well, congratulations on your career. You're obviously a great writer, Patricia. It was clear from the fact that you got picked up at a very busy time when few people did early on. And I'm delighted that you were there just before Harlequin worked out that their back catalogue was worth something to them.
Me too. That's great.
That's some timing, because those books presumably are still working for you.
Yes, they are. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things too to say to the new writers. This is a fabulous, fabulous time because you can reach those markets. That editor who said to me that my books didn't sell well enough to reprint, she was not wrong. For Harlequin and the audience they were reaching, they didn't. But I've been able to reach an entirely different audience and a much larger audience. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased about that.
Which is fantastic.
Can I talk about more things that I want to say to new writers? I have.
We're butting up. Well, I think it's been great. We're butting up against the 40 minutes, which is kind of our cutoff for interviews. What have you got that's?
Well, I will say the writing has to come first. You don't have writing, nothing else matters. So focus on that, focus on your process. And this is not, when we talk about what works for you, that is not just airy fairy or, oh, isn't that lovely? It's got to be what works for you so that you can keep doing it. If you want to have a 30-year plus career, you've got to go for sustainability. And that's both in the writing and in the business part of it. What can you do that you can keep doing? Also, really keep your eye on the future. You absolutely have to know what's coming up. But before I say the future, be financially responsible. Track your money. Don't go in debt. Put money aside for taxes. Build cushions. Have a business account. Have a business credit card. You do not have to have a really intricate financial system, especially to start. Have your business system be built based on what the writing is doing, what is coming in, what the income is doing. And one of the reasons to have that cushion and to have no debt is that it makes you much more flexible when things change, and things are going to change. They are always going to change. And that's one of the reasons I'm very strong on watch this stuff about the future. And well, I will say it, and if I can't say it, you'll cut it out. But I listen to Joanna Penn's Futuristic. She's doing the work for us. She goes through all this information.
She loves a bit of that. Mark, I have to say, is quite cynical about all the sort of AI and the automated narrating and all the stuff that Joe loves. But it's all coming. There's no question about that. It's just when it's coming and when we need to really pay attention to it.
But if you're listening to it now, it's feeding in, and you're going to be ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
If you wait until it's really hot, then you're scrambling to try to figure things out on the fly. And she's keeping up with all these things. Just listen, put it in the back of your head. I'm not saying you have to go out and implement any of it at this moment, but knowing it is power. And it is important because things are going to keep changing. I also want to say the two best things I have ever been told about marketing. One is, I am not my audience. I hear on so many author forums, you hear, well, as a reader, if you hear yourself saying that, stop, because you are not your audience. You have to do what your readers like my 2-time-a-month newsletter, where I keep trying to weasel it back to one. I'm not my audience. You can't do that. Second thing is, my friend Lisa Mondello taught me to say, those are not my people. When you get a bad review, especially a one-off, you get people unsubbing, you get somebody cranky on social media. Those are not your people. And the other aspect of it is, why spend time angsting about people who are not your people?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. We do it. It's human nature. But tell yourself, the focus is on the people who are you people. Give them your time and attention and emotional energy.
Wise words.
Another really, really strong piece of advice is that all advice, all writing, all marketing, all business advice is a buffet. It is not a fixed menu. You pick and choose what works for you. Test it against how you feel, how it makes you feel, and what you do. And go back for more if you want. If that works, try it later, do something else. But, it concerns me that I see so many beginning writers crunched up and trying to do things right. There is not a right.
Yeah.
If there were a right, you wouldn't be hearing 147 different ways that are right. The reason there are so many versions out there is that different things work for different people at different times. So the only way you can do it is to proceed and move on, do it yourself. And if you screw it up, if you have a problem, if it was a horrible mistake, so what? Number one, you don't necessarily know it's a mistake at the time. I used to kick myself for staying with Harlequin as long as I did. And yet those books became the core for my indie career. Was it a mistake to stay with Harlequin or wasn't it? You don't know until the game's over. And by that time you're dead. So it doesn't matter. So just get past those mistakes. And if you totally blow it for some reason, you can always start with a new writing name. If you need to go to a different genre, there are ways to start over. There are ways to rebuild. And that's so amazing. And we're in trad. If you burned your bridges, you burned your bridges. So I hope people will loosen up, focus on the writing, the pleasure that it gives you, whether it's the actual writing or the having written when it's done, and loosen up about the business part about it. You're building your own career, and you can be as creative with that as you are with your own writing. You're not writing anybody else's books. You're not having anybody else's career. Yeah.
I think that's really good advice. I think particularly the fact that there is a lot of advice out there and you do have to pick and choose what's going to work for you. And, I have a friend who all love the same thing when they hear somebody speak, and I look at it and think it's just not going to work for me in terms of the way I write, and that's fine. That's fine. There's other people for us. Brilliant. Patricia, thank you so much. You've got a lot of wisdom and experience from both camps. But the writing is what sustains you, and it is, as you rightly pointed out, the most important thing, the number one thing to focus on. We hope we will meet in person later this year in Florida, but who knows in these times. But we'll look out for that opportunity. And yeah, thank you so much indeed for coming onto the show.
Thank you for letting me spout.
All good.
I have a few opinions.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There you go. I guess you are a discovery writer, Mark.
Yes, probably mostly. Kind of slightly. I have some kind of guidelines I work to, but yeah, I mostly kind of write and we see where we go.
Yeah, you're sort of lead child writer, and you sit down, but you have an idea how the story's going to work by the time you start writing. They're usually based off something that's really happened. So something I've seen in the news or a person who interests me. So I'll take that as a starting off point. Yeah.
Think about how things could be turned into something slightly more dramatic, and then drop Milton or one of my other characters into it and see what happens.
And I think that's how most discovery writers are. The real discovery writers are Marie Force and others who sit down with no idea how the story's going to work, start creating characters and situations and see how they act and how they behave and where the story goes, which is amazing. And she says she gets, she approaches writing a bit like a reader, excited to know what's going to happen next, which is a bizarre concept, isn't it? But works.
Yeah, well, that will reflect in the writing as well. If the author's surprised by the way the characters go, then you can be sure the readers will be too. So that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, look, I want to say thank you very much indeed to our guest, Patricia McLinn, for this week. Okay, that's it for now. Enjoy Tenerife, Mark. All that remains for me to say is this a goodbye from him?
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.